Okay, hi everyone. I'm privileged to have the opportunity to chat with Emma Cooper Serber, who is a therapist specializing working with couples, with individuals and groups who are going through the divorce process. So we'd like to, why don't we introduce you, Emma, why don't you introduce yourselves actually to start to all those listeners, and then we'll get into some questions that we're dying to hear from you.
Great. So I'm Emma Cooper Serber. I'm a clinical social worker, a psychotherapist in private practice, and part of my practice specializes in working with people going through divorce. I work with individuals who are going through divorce. I work with couples who are working together to try and figure out how to have a better divorce, both for themselves emotionally and also for their children. And I also run a group for people going through divorce as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. It certainly sounds like you have a lot of information guidance that could be useful to some of our clients. So to start, knowing that the statistics are what they are, maybe close to 50% for divorce and how common it is in our society, it still remains one of the most stressful times in a person's life. Why is that?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think that despite how prevalent divorce is, there is so much shame associated with divorce, and I think shame. Many emotions are challenging, but I think when you feel shame about something, it can be really paralyzing because it can inhibit someone from reaching out. It can inhibit someone from getting help, from sharing some of the relationship challenges with the people that they're closest with, because of fear of judgment. So I think shame is one key piece. I also think that, just pragmatically, divorce involves moving. And when people kind of rate life stresses, even when a move is a positive move, the act of moving your home is, I think it's listed as one of the top 3 most stressful life events. So we're talking moving, we're talking shame. And I think that whether this is a relationship that's, a 20, 30, 50-year relationship with kids involved, or even a relationship, where, it's just a few years, when people make a decision to decide to get married, people go into it assuming that this is going to be a lifelong commitment. And to have that shift, to have that change in perspective is just really kind of rocks someone's world.
Mm-hmm. So for that spouse whose world is rocked, hearing from their spouse that their spouse wants a divorce, and they find themselves just in a wreck, not being able to function, so weighted by the news of the divorce. How would you advise them how to kind of get out of that black hole and what their next step should be?
And I think that's incredibly hard. That's a incredibly hard place to be, and not uncommon. I would also, I want to just say that there's often the person who is kind of broken up with often assumes that the other person is totally fine. And I think that something to know is that other person, generally, unless they're kind of a sociopath, are not totally fine. They made a really, really difficult, hard decision, and what they have on their side is the fact that they've been probably thinking about this and processing it for a much longer time, and they are perhaps functioning in a way to just kind of get through it because they feel like that's what needs to be done. But I would hesitate to say that only one person in the divorce process is totally rocked by it. I think that if you're able to get support, ideally from a therapist. I think that can really, really help. I think being able to reach out and share with friends and family, if you have that, because the more people that know and can support you, the better. It's one of these things where, when someone has a baby, I feel like the family and friends all rally around, right? They drop off meal. I mean, if you're lucky and you have that community, they drop off meals. You know, they want to take care of you. And I think that it would be wonderful if that could happen with divorce too, right? If there wasn't that shame and people could ask for that help, because I think you do need to be taken care of in a lot of ways. You need to be supported. So I think, ideally connecting with a therapist, connecting, there are support groups, and there is a grieving, there's a grieving process, right? There is going to be a time of grieving, and there's also going to be a time when you have to kind of put one foot in front of the other. And sometimes there's this idea of kind of pretending until it becomes real, right? So you're going through the motions, and maybe you're not necessarily feeling your best, but you are going through it to remember kind of what it is like to step back into your life, even if that life is very different and a life that is not the life that you imagined it.
That sounds like some good advice.
And sometimes I do think, it is not uncommon, and this is not by any chance always the case, and I'm not a psychiatrist, that if you are truly paralyzed and unable to get out of bed, right, and unable to kind of perform these daily functions of life, that there may be a need for some medication, right? Because which doesn't mean you would be on medication forever, but it might be useful to get through this period. And I would also say that this period doesn't last forever.
Is there a timeline that might be typical in terms of how long it might last for?
I think it really, really depends. I don't, I sort of hesitate to say what is a normal timeline, because I think it really depends on so many things, whether it's, the length of the relationship, or if that person has outside supports outside of that relationship, whether that person has a job, right? Whether that person has family, whether they have kids. I think there's, I don't think that there is like a specific timeline. And I think it is, I think it's also cyclical, it's not a straight line, right? It's not, 6 months have gone by and I feel great, right? It's a few months have gone by, and now it's Thanksgiving and that's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
A few months go by and I feel great and things are moving forward, and this would have been our anniversary, right? So, or a child's birthday, or all of these things. And so, while I do very strongly believe things get better, it does get better and you will feel better, that it is not, it's not linear.
Mm-hmm. And, in regard to this, the works of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross have come up a lot in terms of the stages of mourning.
Yes.
Can you take us through that in terms of the stages? Again, also, I'm sure cyclical, and what like a journey through the loss experience, mourning would look like in this context.
So I was going to reference Kubler-Ross exactly. So Kubler-Ross, it's right. I think it's denial, anger, sadness or depression.
The negotiation.
Negotiation.
I wonder what that means. Yeah.
Yeah, negotiation. I almost want to pull it up to look, but it is very.
And then I think is the last one, right?
What did you say?
I think healing is the last one.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes. And much like the grief cycle, it is not, just because you get to another point, that doesn't mean you don't go back, and it doesn't, that it is not linear. So the first, I think the first is shock. Is it shock or surprise?
Shock, denial, I think.
Shock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, perfectly aligns with when someone first decides to get a divorce. And I think that is the case even when it is the person who has made that decision, because it's that reality, right? Of this is actually happening, that we are actually getting a divorce. We're actually moving towards this separation. And denial is, I think denial is second in her circle. Do you have it up on your screen? Or
I'm actually getting it now. Yeah.
I wonder if you could share it.
That's exactly what I'm going to do.
Okay.
And, as often the case, it looks like I just, whatever I found quickly on the website, it breaks it into, I always thought there were 5. So this kind of breaks it. Do you see it?
Oh, yes. It's been sort of updated.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah. I don't know if she's still around, but
either, but this is actually, I like this, but this is updated. So we can just kind of looking at this, right? So there's the shock, both I think from the person, and we're assuming one person made the decision, the other person is sort of surprised by it. But also what I was saying is that even the person that made that decision, I think they can be sort of shocked at the reality that they've made that decision.
Mhm.
But I think for someone who really assumed that their relationship, they were going to work on their relationship, or even had no idea or didn't realize the relationship was in trouble, that shock is incredibly, incredibly hard. And then denial, right? Disbelief, like how is it possible I've spent my life or 10, 15, 20 years with this person, and that this is going to change, and kind of not believing that. I think there's this experience both in losing someone through death and also divorce, kind of that waking up in the morning and remembering that this is reality, which I think is something that people experience both when they've lost someone and in divorce. And I think she put frustration rather than the negotiation, maybe.
Yeah, and I actually see that this is actually a Kubler-Ross change curve. So it actually might not be specifically for just what the first thing I found.
Right.
So that might be, explain why it's a little different than what we typically see.
Yeah. But frustration and negotiation, or maybe the frustration was the anger, right? There's often a lot of anger in divorce, and anger. How could you make this decision to end the relationship? I know, there's something that I feel like I often hear, which is that, I know we were unhappy, but like we were going to work through, or it was going to get better, and kind of an anger that this decision has seemingly been made without that other person. And there's that depression, which I think is what you were speaking to before, about someone who is, sort of so paralyzed they can't get out of bed, and they can't maybe function in the way that they would like to function.
And then I think that the next stage, I think, is the bargaining.
Yeah, bargaining. Like, well, what if we, is there something I could do? Is there something we could do? Could we make this work? Could I change? What could I do? And I think all of this is totally normal.
Right.
And then there is this, like, if this is the reality, how can I make this a livable situation for myself.
Mhm.
And I love this idea of integration, right? That you're then integrating this new life.
Right. Doesn't mean that the sadness, the grief, it doesn't go away. It just integrated within the new life, in the reality.
Yes, yes. And this particular picture doesn't show it as a circle, but I just want to reiterate that these things can happen at any time, right? Your first thing may be anger or depression, or, I've even seen people who, kind of just like accept it. And then, a few months later, kind of go back and to some of those, what are traditionally sort of the early stages.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 I actually, I see here that I'll just for a moment, actually, there we go. It's another chart, just interesting how I'll share this as well. Maybe I should have done this before. Um, so this is
Mm.
actually a little different frame. It actually, I did find it on a page dealing with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's ideas, but some of the terminology is different.
Yeah.
Anyway, so a lot of different charts, a lot of different pictures, and it's all there, and hopefully people will get through that journey sooner than later. But
And I think one thing to remember is that because it is a journey and because it is a loss, right? Divorce is a loss, whether you wanted that divorce or you didn't want it initially. It is a loss, and to allow that, right? That grief and loss takes time.
yeah, yeah.
Takes time.
So going back to the question of support, and
Mhm.
you mentioned both group therapy and individual therapy, as well as other ways of getting support. Can you speak to, for those who might be interested in getting that kind of support, what would be kind of the benefits, advantages, disadvantages of the group versus the individual support? And how one might consider what would be the right kind of support for them.
Sure. Um, so I'm a therapist and I see individuals and see groups. So perhaps I am biased in my in my thoughts and
We
opinions.
do both.
But everyone in my group over the years is also in individual therapy,
Uh,
because a group is, I think a group is truly wonderful and one of the most healing ways that someone can get support through during a divorce. And that is because you meet other people who are going through either are at some stage in the divorce process. And so you can connect, you have that opportunity, at its best, you have that opportunity to both learn from and hear from people who have maybe are a little farther along in the process. And so you can kind of get perhaps some more hope, some guidance in that, and also people who are newer to the process. And so you also have the opportunity to realize maybe how far you've come, which I think is really powerful. So my groups are, people, sometimes people are in exactly the same place, but usually there's a range. And I think it's just incredibly powerful to hear from a peer, to hear from someone who is going through it, who can say, yes, it's awful, and it's terrible. And I am here, right? And I actually am really happy that I am living on my own right now, or whatever that is. But I think it can really, having that peer support, I think, is so powerful. And to have that shared experience, to have, I think there's also, in addition to shame and stigma and this feeling of isolation in divorce, and guilt. I think guilt, especially for parents, and to have other people that they can, share those experiences with, and comfort each other for things that they also need comfort with. That is a really powerful experience. The reason why I recommend someone is also in individual therapy is because it is a shared space, right? With anywhere between, 70 to 90 minutes. And if you have 6 people in a group, that time can't just be spent on one person. So there is really, you have to really share that time. And that's why it's important to be in a group with a facilitator, because that facilitator can really share, help that time to be shared without feeling like someone is necessarily dominating and someone is never talking. But having that individual support is also really, really important.
With regard to the group work, are there consistent themes or topics that come up in the groups?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What are the top 3?
Top 3. I think among parents, guilt, feeling really guilty for having this life change that is going to impact their kids. And I think there's just tremendous guilt that is huge. Isolation. So this feeling of somehow, even though we know that, which we talked about, right? Is it 50% that end in divorce? About that in their kind of friend circle, no one's divorced. Everyone is happy and has the perfect relationship. So this feeling that they're really alone and isolated in that. And one, just kind of going back to the question before, why group? One thing that I also often hear is, oh my God, I just feel like I'm a burden to my friends and family. Everyone is sick of hearing about this. And so having a place and time where this is what you talk about with people who also want to be talking about it. So guilt, isolation, anger. I think it's really hard to pick 3, just 3, but I think, often people are really angry at spouses, often angry at themselves also.
Yeah. And I assume your group work is in person, notwithstanding.
So pre-COVID, my group work was all in person. Since March 2020, it has all been virtual, which I think was a really hard adjustment initially, but then ended up working really wonderfully. And one of the benefits was that, I was able to have a group with people from Washington, D.C., and someone who had left to live with their parents in another state because of COVID, but really needed the support. So it was able to, or someone who, my group was in at 9 a.m. in Brooklyn, right? And so I have had people come from Manhattan to do that, but that's a lot. And so it enabled even just someone on the Upper West Side. And so that it didn't cut into people's work days as much.
Right.
It was interesting. I had been also a little wary, but the connections that people made, not just with me, but with each other. In fact, I recently heard from a group member who said, oh, I'm still in touch with people from the group.
Right. Nice. So shifting gears a bit, in working with many individuals who are going through the divorce, can you speak to the different ways of getting through the divorce process, whether it's the mediation, more the traditional attorney to attorney settlement or litigation. Collaborative law might not be something you're familiar with, I'm not sure. Can you speak about the different processes and how you experience it in your role, how it will impact the individuals and the families going through it?
Absolutely. So, I'm just trying to think of how to phrase this exactly.
Generally, right? It doesn't have to be process by process. You could speak
Yeah.
about generally.
So I think that generally, when people, many people that I work with start out with mediation, and that is kind of their goal. And for many people, it works for them. I have found in my work that working in mediation or collaborative law has had the best outcomes emotionally, and probably financially, actually.
And you're not just saying that because that's what I do.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that because I truly, and it really depends. I've also had clients who have, tried mediation, then moved to collaborative, and then it just disintegrates and there's nothing they can do. And they have to have, do the traditional attorney. But what I've seen is that there is, through the mediation and collaborative law process, the goal is, to reduce the animosity, right? To reduce the conflict. And I think as humans, most of us really prefer to not be in conflict. It feels better when you are not constantly fighting and in conflict with someone, especially someone you really were quite intimate with. And I think what mediation can offer is it can bring some humanity to the process. I think when you're just going lawyer to lawyer, and again, I think sometimes that's what people have to do, 100%. And I'm also not speaking to those relationships that involve abuse, right? That is also a very different. But I think working with mediators and in collaborative law, there is really this goal that no one is going to leave, right? I won or I lost, and that means that no one also leaves with I lost, right? And the goal is really that you leave that relationship. And of course, if you have kids, you're not leaving that relationship completely, but you're leaving the marriage without that feeling of I lost this fight or I won this fight, and that kind of bitterness and anger that can really churn up if those are if it's that sort of black and white thinking. I think it allows for a lot more nuance and a lot more humanity and feeling. And I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you, Adam.
One of the things that I've experienced, which caught me by surprise, at least a decade into doing this, is by working directly at the mediation table, a couple is able to really transition their relationship, no longer as spouses, but obviously in the context of co-parenting. And even when there is no children, it reorients them, and they're doing it directly without the proxies of legal experts, doing their thing. And that, I think, allows for that healing through that direct communication.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's the humanity, right? If you're just speaking through emails and lawyers, like, you forget that there's actually a person there that you loved, or still love.
Right.
And I think that,
the other.
Right, exactly. And I think you're absolutely right. It's this, and mediation, for anyone who's gone through it, right? It's not a quick process, right? So there is this, and you get to have that process kind of with this other person. You experience and watch this relationship shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, someone related to that on more relational side, for someone who is going through the direction of divorce, what recommendation would you have to help him or her have the closure on the relationship, on the marriage, so that when they do move on eventually, they won't be haunted in their future relationship or however else in life, by what happened in the past?
Mhm. And closure is sort of one of these words that is
Maybe too linear.
yeah, because it is a process, and I think moving on is a process, right? You are going to, date other people or be in relationships with other people and realize things about your marriage that you didn't realize, or be struck by things that are so different, and maybe in that both have some moments of remembering what might have been really nice about your marriage and what really didn't work for you. I think closure again is sort of this hard word, but I think allowing yourself time and space, right?
Mhm.
And to process, process, going through this kind of Kubler-Ross grief cycle to process. And that doesn't mean that, in some of those stages you won't be dating or you won't, but that to kind of allow yourself the kind of breadth of emotional experience, whether that's, sadness and happiness and excitement and anger and all of those different things. The thing that I always tell people is to be gentle with yourself, right? Like, this is incredibly hard, and allowing that you're going to have good days and bad days when you don't behave in the way that you want to behave, and days that you're really sad and days that you feel really good, but kind of, that you can treat yourself with a little bit more gentleness,
Mhm. Yeah, I
and
agree.
maybe even ask for that from those who love you.
Mhm. And last but not least, let's have the last question with regard to the children.
Mhm.
So what in your experience, what is the best way of ensuring that the children of couples who go through divorce are not scarred by what's going on with their parents?
Great question, and something that's really important to me, and something that I talk and work a lot with my families and couples and in the groups, because no one goes into this wanting to hurt their kids, obviously. Um, the most important thing you can do is to work through your own anger and frustration and sometimes hatred for your ex-partner without sharing that with your kids. I think the thing that makes divorce divorce is hard on kids. I'm not going to pretend that it is not hard on kids, but I think the thing that really harms kids is when parents speak badly about the other parent. I think when there's, yelling at each other, when there's that fighting, and when kids are brought into the conflict, whether it's by, oh, your dad is such a jerk, why does your dad always do this, or mom is always nagging, whatever it is. The most important thing for kids to know is that that their parents love them, and that this is not their fault, because kids, no matter what, will have this idea that it is their fault, because and that's what we do, right? When there's chaos, and when you can't control, when kids feel out of control, right? If they can blame themselves, that's sort of a way to feel more in control. So reducing the amount of animosity between you and your partner is truly the best thing that you can do, which kind of goes back to why mediation, right? because if you guys are in a highly conflict legal fight, right, that is going to seep down, right? That is absolutely going to trickle down, or you have to work a lot harder to not let it trickle down. And so, for better or for worse, this divorce, this relationship is still one of the most important relationships in your life if you have kids, because they will always be the parent of your child, and you will always need to work to have a relationship that has less conflict. And you do that for your kids. Yeah. And it's not always easy.
Yeah. Okay. Emma Cooper Serber, thank you for your compassion, your empathy, the wisdom of clearly a lot of experience working with couples going through this. I think this will benefit many, and no less important is how else they could be benefited if they're going through this. So can you just share, how people, if they're interested in following up, whether your group work or individually, how could they find out more about what you do?
Sure. You can email me at emma.cooperserber.lcsw@gmail.com. I also have a website, emmacooperserber.com. And you can reach out to Adam. He has all my contact information. And I work with, I do groups, I do individual, and I also, if a couple just wants to come in for a few sessions to talk about, how to tell their kids or how to work together, to divorce in a way that feels better. I'm not a mediator, but to kind of support them in a therapeutic environment. I do that kind of work as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.